Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming back from lunch. And I can assure you we'll make it worth your while. A panel like this does not come together very often. And this lineup of actors and superstars is something that you'll rarely see on stage together at any one point. So I'm not going to take very much of this time and just straight away get into the conversation. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Mittal. As leading the safety issues around the oil and gas business in this country, you have a fairly unenviable task. As a country, we've had a fairly spectacular record in terms of oil and gas safety. We haven't had the dramatic kind of accidents that we've seen in the US, in Russia, or anywhere else. But we still aren't quite best in class. And even though our record is quite good, what is it that we need to do to get to the top of the class, and what kind of consistent improvements in safety culture, infrastructure, enforcement will make us the gold standard in safety in the oil and gas business?
Thank you, Mr. Kaushik. So good afternoon, namaskar. Very pertinent topic. See, whichever conference you do, safety goes hand in hand. Without safety, you can't have operations. Now companies aspire to become an energy company from oil and gas companies. I think every company is now changing themselves, remodeling them to become an energy company. So it becomes more important to understand because landscape is also changing. As far as safety per se, if you compare the accident data, India stands pretty well. And I'm not talking only of E&P sector, it's all the sector taken together because OISD is looking after almost all the sectors in oil and gas industry. Our regulations, our standards are pretty good. As far as OISD is concerned, which I am heading, Oil Industry Safety Directorate, we establish standards for oil and gas industry. As on date, we have 109 standards, and our standards are pretty stringent. And many of our standards are adopted in various rule regulations. To be precise, 23 of our standards are in various rules regulations. Our standards are adopted by industry because they are made by industry itself. So as such, we have a standard on each and everything you can think of in oil and gas space. And if anything is left out, request comes to it and we make a new standard. Very recently we made a standard on hydrogen safety. We are working on a standard on compressed biogas. So we are also aligning ourselves to move to new areas where the oil and gas companies are going. So a standard part is good. Every company can make or every country can make their own regulation standard. We have seen on road there is a lot of rules, regulations already there. We have act, we have rules, still we see people violating it. So there has to be some watchdog, there has to be certain systems to see that it remains in place. Industry plays the first role because everyone understands in oil and gas industry, safety is paramount. If anything happens, it will have lot of repercussion. We have seen some accidents, some major one also. And one of the major incident in last decade I can remember is the blowout which happened in Assam. It continued for almost 6 months, so that was the biggest. Otherwise our record is pretty good. So there are various watchdogs, there are different regulators. Apart from that, OISD plays the biggest role. Being a technical directorate of Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, we carry out our own safety audits, and our audits are supposed to be pretty stringent. For a refinery, like we carry out audit for 5 days with 6 to 7 persons, and those auditors are pretty experienced auditor covering the entire spectrum of operations within a refinery. So you can understand that what sorts of rigidness or what sorts of strictness goes into that audit process. Observations come up, industry tries to implement. So that part is pretty okay. If observations are not complied, there is a structured system where it goes even up to Safety Council, which is chaired by Secretary MOPNG, and it is taken care of. One more initiative ministry has taken. They established a working group, a 22-member working group under Mr. M.K. Surana, ex-CMD of HPCL, which worked on working towards or recommendations for enhancement of safety in oil and gas sector, covering all the spectrums. So some 261 recommendations have been given, which industry is in the process of implementing. So we expect with implementations of those recommendations, which inter alia covered the cultural issues, because when we see a corporate presentation, we see every element of safety into it. We see every latest technological innovations which has happened, automations which have happened, adoption of AI, VR, AR, anything you name it. Our industry is very fast in adopting. Probably oil and gas industry has a big pocket and they can do it. But the problem lies in the violations. Systems are in place, barriers are in place, but during accidents when we investigate, we find number of barriers have been bypassed, either they are not working, they are ineffective, or something has happened, competency of people may not be sufficient enough. So we find number of gaps, and everything boils down to more or less leadership, safety culture, and few other issues. Moreover, now contracts are increasing in oil and gas industry to a great extent. So there also contract management becomes an issue. The competency of people that needs to be ensured, specifically of the contractual workers. Our assets are aging. If you know, our first refinery was established in 1901, Digboy Refinery. And our first pipeline was laid sometimes in 1960. So assets, there are number of assets, number of pipelines which have crossed more than 50 years. Obviously, they need replacements, they need that sort of attendance. So issues are there. We are revising our standards very recently, like we revised our standards on pipelines, bringing some very new requirements for pipelines which have aged more than 25 years. So our standards are also becoming stringent, and I hope the industry will become more safer. The graph is a dropping graph, accident graph if I talk of, and I hope it will drop further. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mittal. And this is your ask from industry, right? So let's just turn to industry. Don, you've been at Reliance now. Reliance, a pioneer in terms of private sector participation in the Indian oil and gas business, one of the largest participants. And presumably at the other end of the spectrum from Digboy, one of the newest kind of assets that we have in this country. What are the prospects that you see for Reliance in terms of growth in India? How do you see your assets being developed, especially as they continue to be found in extremely challenging and difficult environments, places that we ordinarily wouldn't have gone back to drill in 30 years back? So what is it now that you are going to do over the next 15, 20 years as we become the next big oil market in the world?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Kaushik, for that question. Good afternoon to all of you. It's a great pleasure and a privilege to be here with you today. I'm going to answer that question in two parts, and I'm going to start by sharing some perspectives on some trends that I think are important that are happening in oil and gas and in energy more broadly right now that would be useful for establishing some context to talk about what Reliance is doing right now and some of our plans going forward. And I'll finish my response with a bit of an update on some of the projects that we're moving forward with. So the first thing that I'm gonna say, it might be a little bit controversial, and that's good because we just finished lunch and we're in the afternoon session, so I'm gonna shake things up just a little bit. I'm gonna question this whole concept of an energy transition. I hear this term all the time, the energy transition. When I think about a transition, I think about moving or transitioning from one thing to another thing. And I'm not sure that that's actually what's happening in the energy sector. If we look broadly, globally, across the energy sector, what we're seeing is that oil is at record high level of consumption. Natural gas is at a record high level of consumption. We're consuming more coal than we've ever used before, and I'm talking about globally again. So when I see that, those numbers don't point to me as a transition from one type of fuel to another. What they kind of point to me is an energy expansion. This idea that oil, gas, and coal going forward will continue to be important in the energy mix, actually dominant most likely in the energy mix for the foreseeable future. But because energy is expanding so much, there are many opportunities for other types of energy sources to take more or participate more in that market. And so that kind of begs the question on some of these new energy initiatives that are taking shape, who will drive that forward? And what I would argue, and I'm going to give some examples, I'm going to use Reliance to give some examples, is that it's traditional oil and gas companies that will drive many of these new energy initiatives forward. It's our traditional producers of oil, gas, and coal. So in my country, I'm from the United States, and one of the things and so I'm going to use some examples there as analogies. One of the things that's happening is there's a renaissance going on in enhanced geothermal energy. So historically, geothermal energy was only possible in very specific, very specialized locations where there's very high heat flow, fluids bringing a lot of heat up to the surface, and you could access that. What we're finding now is that we can access geothermal energy much, much more broadly by bringing in technology from the oil and gas industry, particularly from the shale industry, the horizontal drilling and multi-stage hydraulic completion. So it's really this enhanced geothermal industry that's taking shape and is now starting to move forward with some commercial projects in the US is really almost like an offspring of the shale business in North America. It's the same technology that's now being brought into this energy expansion. Another example, you may have heard this direct lithium extraction project that's taking place in the US in a formation called the Smackover in the central US. It's a game changer. It's a tremendous new development in the field of critical minerals. And it's oil and gas expertise. It's not a mining project or a lithium-specific project. It's oil and gas expertise that's making that project possible. And I would say the same applies to the new exploration for hydrogen. So it's really traditional oil and gas companies that are bringing their capital, their expertise, their technology, and their talent into this energy expansion without necessarily sacrificing any focus or emphasis on our focus on oil and gas. So if I just bring that back around to some examples of things that Reliance is working on, of course I can't sit up here and go into a lot of specifics, but I think going forward, probably in 2025, we'll be seeing exploration for geothermal energy using the technology that I just talked about. I believe that is very likely to happen onshore India in the first part of 2025, bringing this technology over and executing an exploration project to see if we can employ that here. Also on the hydrogen front, we now have a team that's dedicated specifically on natural hydrogen exploration. Part of that is also helium exploration. That's another focus that we have. That's it turns out helium, it's not just about balloons. It's it's a vital industrial gas with strategic significance. Without it, there is no energy expansion because it's required for the manufacture of high-end electronics and semiconductors and chips. And we're in a very, very severe helium shortage in the world right now. So Reliance just announced, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, our first transaction in that helium space, taking a position with a helium producer in North America, a 21% stake with a helium producer in North America, with the idea of moving forward to be more active in that space. However, and I guess this is one of my core points, we're working on all of these things at Reliance, and we'll be executing projects here in the next few years on all of them, but not at the sacrifice of our traditional oil and gas business. So we're still growing our coal bed methane asset in Madhya Pradesh. I think our production's up about 27% in the last 14 months, which is a great success to the team. And I can talk about what some of the things that are driving that success if we want to. And maybe not in 2025, but from 2026 onward, we'll see more capital investment in KGD6 in the Deepwater Bay of Bengal and our gas assets, and potentially even on the Northeast coast a little bit farther to the north. So I guess my point to wrap up is our traditional oil and gas business is still going strong, but as part of this energy expansion, we also have dedicated teams that are working on executing projects in all of these myriad other areas.
Thanks, Don. Kumar sir, I mean, Don has kind of made a fairly provocative statement that there is no energy transition, there's only energy expansion. Now, you've been a member of the Energy Transition Task Force at the Ministry. You've also led India's largest E&P company. So in some sense, you come to this dais wearing both these hats. Now, would you want to contest what Don is saying, or would you agree with him?
So, thanks for having me here, and wonderful to be among one of the most learned audience or colleagues from oil and gas sector or energy sector. I think good to, if world were to agree on everything, then it would be a very monotonous place. But at the same time, I agree to an extent that oil and gas is here to stay. It's required because still, whatever we say, around 80% of the energy which is consumed in the world is still oil and gas. There is also a saying that there is a last straw which breaks the back of animal, back of camel. And I make this comment in a context, only painting a scenario, not necessarily that it has become, that much discernible. Last year, actually, the share of oil and gas in overall energy, the way the world consumed it, reduced. It reduced by 0.4% to be specific. But that's how all empires crumble. I'm not saying it is the beginning of that. Now, we have very different scenarios as far as different countries in the world are concerned, and I would like to concentrate on India as opposed to the rest of the world. India is very, very privilegedly placed as far as this energy transition is concerned. You say at times, you use certain terms without knowing that to be at right place at the right time. India probably is actually there at the right time for the reason that we are a growing economy. We, for all writings on the wall, will be growing around 7 to 8 times by 2050. From 3.6, 3.7 trillion economy today, we would be close to around 25. However, how this growth will come? Because growth is synonymous with energy. If you don't have energy, you can't grow. So part of it was answered in the previous session that in certain areas we consume 2.5 times more energy than rest of the world. So if one were to discount that factor of 7 by 2.5, then we would come to a point of 3, which means that we would require an energy 3 times of what we consume today. Now, we are not talking of a static world. World itself is moving. Energy improvement is taking place at the rate of around 2 to 3% on an annual basis. So during the next, actually 25 years or so, we would have actually, the energy requirement per unit of output will reduce by half. So which means we would require roughly 1.5 to 2 times the energy which we require. So an economy which is to grow 8 times will require only double the energy which it is consuming today, and for the reason based on which I am giving today. Now, where from this energy comes as far as India is concerned? India actually today, population is a huge, huge resource. We are a small country as far as geographical spread is concerned. We actually have around 2.7% of land mass or 3% or so, 18% of population, which means we are the only country in the world or among the few which have a capacity to make local disaggregated energy supply chains which is an ideal foil for capitalizing the domestic endowments like biofuels. You don't have a compulsion of producing in one part of India and transporting to rest of the, distant places or for exports. You can produce there and consume there. So that is a huge, huge plus as far as India is concerned. Second factor, which is often forgotten, India is endowed very differently and privilegedly as far as the biofuel potential is concerned. Our 54%, 52 to 54% land mass is arable against global average of around 12%, which is roughly 4.5 to 5 times higher than rest of the world. We have capacity to use biofuels at scale at disaggregated level against locally. However, I have actually having the right conditions to transition without disruption and in an orderly manner is one thing. But being able to actually realize that there could be a difference. It's like, being the most eligible bachelor and still being able to, get the right match. We need to make efforts. It's not going to happen on its own. And for that, I think very systematic efforts India needs to make. Two things I would suggest. One is that actually they need to have a body like Energy Transition Advisory Committee, because energy is no longer the domain of individual ministries. Whatever, let's say, Ministry of Coal is doing, or Ministry of Power is doing, or Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas is doing, it has a bearing on the way your counterpart in other sources is planning. So it is critical that from energy transition perspective, there is a body which regulates, which has a capacity to direct, and others follow. Oil and gas for India is going to stay relevant for quite some time. The last point I want to make about global level, actually, a couple of years back it was said that everybody's eyes were on China, and that there was a discussion when China is going to plateau in terms of energy requirement. You look at today's newspaper, they are plateauing 5 years earlier than what was anticipated. So they are plateauing in terms of energy requirement this year. And if that happens, this is also a relevant consideration. I'm not saying any warning signal for anybody, but it's a very relevant consideration. And if China were to able to do it 5 years earlier, then it's a very good actually example for the rest of the world and especially for India to follow. So I think big signals, we have capacity to have a orderly and smooth transition. Because of certain privileged situations we are in, but we need to make efforts to make it happen and realize those. It will not happen automatically. At times we are announcement heavy. We have an action bias and get down, roll sleeves and get working. And I am sure the country can do it. Last point I want to make also. On gas, there has been discussion. It's high time that a body is set up which takes responsibility for taking gas share in economy from 6 to 15%. Actually, this was talked of in 2015 at Urja Sangam. The reason for that again is why gas is important despite being a fossil fuel, is that it can be an ideal fuel for building up scale of biofuel, especially CBG and hydrogen. So if India were to go for low carbon or clean fuel systems, gas is an ideal base on which the superstructure can be built.
Thank you, Kumar sir. Ladies and gentlemen, as you would have kind of seen for the last 5 or 6 minutes that he was speaking, this entire day could be just a masterclass by Mr. Kumar, and that's all we would need to do. He made several very interesting points, including the role of gas and how important that could have been in India's energy mix, and that's something that I'm sure our colleagues in Reliance have learned quite a bit. But Deepak, if I can come to you and talk about two things that Kumar Saab was talking about. The first, of course, that this is India's moment. Now, my gray hair have told me one thing, that the number of times that I've been told in my life that this is India's moment, I've lost count. Do you really think this is India's moment finally? And if it is India's moment, then where is this money going to come from? Kumar Saab again listed out a whole bunch of project, commercial opportunities. Is it really something that the world will really come looking into investing in India, or we'll again have to just do it by ourselves?
Thank you so much. And I can't agree with you more about Subhashji's masterclass potential. Amazing. And so did the earlier two speakers from their own field of expertise context, made very provocative and very timely comments from India's context. The question that you posed, is it India's moment? Yes. I don't think I, being a panel member or the panelists, and probably most of the audience will also disagree, it is an India's moment. But as always we say, ABC but, and there are a few things that we need to ensure to make our moment to be encashed, monetized and enjoyed. The panel being for exploration production, let me start from there, and I understand your investment requirements will come from where is the condition that's coming up. We have seen with our own open naked eyes that how we eluded potential of E&P explorations coming to India. We went wrong. There is a potential for investments even today, and in far more accelerated manner that it is being seen today. That not alone comes from the fact that both the speakers have said energy demand is here, the market is here, and the need for oil and gas will not die. That's obviously one of the reasons why you have domestic production requirements. But also probably some of our basins will support this decision, and the necessity to save foreign exchange, be self-dependent and so on and so forth. So there are so many meritorious causes because of which one will focus on bringing investment into exploration production in India. I don't think the subject is old, and even if it were to be an old subject, the context has been changing at all times. The context is, at a time when India's moment has arrived, is this the place to invest for exploration production? And I'll come by one on different forms of energy and so on. So just imagine if what is happening to ORDA today, what is happening to various operating regulations today, or for that matter gas pricing, etc., were to be available in 1999. I don't think the decisions that we are taking today are any wrong. Everybody is convinced, including the government. And the democratic government passing such kind of laws is being seen as extremely useful to the industry for development. If these decisions were taken in 2099, 98, I'm sure the exploration production industry would have been very, very different today. In 2005, we wrote a publication from PricewaterhouseCoopers. The executive summary of that particular report in second paragraph wrote, if the regulatory mechanism, it meant that the controlling mechanisms for exploration production industry can be tightened, for sure, and you will get better outcomes out of it. But the more you tighten that, the investors will go to other countries. In exploration production, I don't think companies compete with each other. They compete with countries, and countries compete with each other and attract potential for investments. And which is where, in some sense, we let go our attractive regime for investments in India and exploration production to other countries, and the capital did not get attracted. There is a moment for us to start from here again, having learned from the past, and make those investments happen in India, and it still can happen because, as both the speakers ratified, for another 20 to 25 years, we will need the kind of volumes that we are consuming even today. So with 85, 87, 89% that was spoken on earlier panels is the import potential India has. If we can bring that into India and invest, that will be great. Is it an attractive regime? Absolutely. Exploration production is an attractive regime to invest in, and still we aren't getting dollar. That means there is something above the ground risk which investors are seeing now. Carrying forward that discussion to other forms of fuel and energies, the shale gas gets produced by far, gets transported, get liquefied, gets put into the ship, gets transported, regasified, put into pipelines, gets compressed, reaches our industries and homes, and we still use it. And that gas is competing with something which we can produce in the backyards like biogas, or for that matter, ethanol, the way the Honorable Minister said. Now, what's that supply chain which has matured so well that can optimally bring fuel into our burners? Why can't our supply chain just in the backyards become home? So, the way Mr. Subhash Kumar said, a committee, a panel, a ministry, or whatever gives a thought to this, that as early as possible, rather than 20 years later, if we can make this happen, the domestic production of non-conventional and biofuels will far outweigh any other options for gas consumption in any circumstances, because the cost of gas, as we see, is extremely easy to compete with from a domestic production perspective. The other forms of energy sources will also compete from the context of supply chain and not so much the source cost or destination price, but it'll be all in the infrastructure creation, supply chain modalities, and optimization of that supply chain costs. The next one is, how do we attract these investments and how do we make this India's moment happen for investors in the energy sector to enjoy this moment and realize that monetization? So many a times it has happened that companies have not invested in India for the reasons that they do not have the right partners, that they do not see how the regulatory mechanisms will play. They have uncertainty about policy regimes, and in many cases, there is also a monopolistic infrastructure created which is not being allowed to be shared with others. This is true with pipelines, this is true with tankages, this is true with warehouses, and even as we go into the downstream value chains of even agro-waste collection, storage, maybe briquetting or biogas conversion and sale. Even all of this infrastructure, the investors that are coming in today are required to invest themselves. Can you imagine, there is not even one company in India today who has not thought of agro-waste collection to gas production, the complete value chain. There isn't an ecosystem which is readily available for them. So I thought this is what segmented investments, creating that infrastructure for investors to come and pick the niche of their company and invest and make this biogas, biofuel regime happen. Happy to come into any other comments that come up in the panel, but I thought this is India's moment.
Thanks, thanks, Deepak. Don, now you talked about Reliance's expansion plans and what you are seeking to do in India across all sorts of energies. According to Deepak, this is what you should be doing in India right now compared to anywhere else in the world and in the sectors that you are in. What is it that between what Kumar Saab said, what Deepak said, that you would like to see more from government by way of either support or deregulation or just stepping away and making the space available to private players like Reliance and international partners that you have to come in and play a bigger role? We've barely scratched the surface, or rather I should say the subsurface, in terms of what exists underground. How can we do more, and what is it that you would want in terms of the facilitating environment?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to build on some comments that were made earlier in the day. I think for Reliance, if we had a wish list with the government,
I'm sure you do.
and we do, absolutely. Probably one of the most important things would be helping us find ways to commercialize fields that are marginally economic right now. Discoveries, gas discoveries, there are many of them actually here in India. It can have a significant impact on meeting energy demand. We have some in our portfolio that when first discovered, they just did not make economic sense to move forward with for development. Now the environment has changed. We're going back and we're re-examining some of those opportunities, and what we're finding is that the opportunity to work a little bit with DGH, work closely with the state to make some of those more attractive to us would help us bring more resource to the market. So that's probably the single biggest impact, I think, in terms of a wish list item.
And if I can kind of bring it back to you, Mr. Mittal. Now, safety is paramount in our business. I mean, you walk into an oil company, the first thing that they do is give you a safety briefing, no matter what you are there for, whether you're delivering a crate of water or you're going there to sign a business deal. right from the moment you enter the gates to the moment you leave, safety becomes paramount for anything that you do, not just if you're on a big asset. But all of this costs money and is expensive, and sometimes is the kind of thing that is debilitating, especially in contexts where companies or investors or operators are not familiar with. Is there a way of kind of bridging this gap, making safety more investor friendly, trying to find a way where this relationship between safety regulations and what the private sector does, or what any operator does, the public sector operator does, is less adversarial?
Putting a cost to safety is difficult. If I say worldwide, anywhere you go, the hazards remain the same. If you are working in an oil and gas industry, everyone understands the potential of catastrophe which can happen. So if you are drilling a well, you have to take care of the safety. You should have a proper well control equipment. You should have a proper trained crew. So whatever minimum safety is required, it has to be there. Now we understand lot many small and medium operators, they have taken fields under the DSF rounds of DGH, and many of the small operators, we find during our audits that they are struggling on certain requirements. So the point is how far it can be relaxed, because minimum safety criteria has to be there. People competence has to be there. We have seen because of incompetence, few of the accidents being happened. We have seen failure of few of the equipments where accidents have happened. So those things need to be taken care of to some extent for small operators. Even DGH, and we are also facilitating them by providing free trainings. So many of the things are on an anvil which we are doing from our end. But per se, the standard, the regulations, they remain the same, whether it is a PSU or a private sector. And we have not got any reservation or any observation or any comments during making of our standards based on the cost or investment per se. Because any regulation rule which is made in any stage, it is being shared with the industry. Like we are operating, we are regulator for offshore, and there is a Petroleum Natural Gas Safety in Offshore Rules 2008 under Oilfield Regulation Development Act. It is under revision. So we have uploaded it for comments, and we have not received any comments per se, which I can say where companies have asked for relaxations because of the cost intensity. So I don't feel safety can be relaxed because the cost is involved.
Point well taken. Safety is priceless, and if you were to save lives, you can't put a value to that. Kumar Sahib, if I can kind of bring it all back to you again once. We've talked about a whole variety of targets in the energy business. Some that we've achieved, some that we haven't. And let me kind of list a few out that I've noticed in my experience. 15% share of gas in the energy mix, a miss. A target for energy independence by 2047, seemingly very hard. And when I say kind of seemingly very hard, I really mean very, very difficult. But the flip side of the energy mix, 175 gigawatts of non-fossil by 2022, getting on to 500 gigawatts of non-fossil by 2030, increasing the share of renewables in the energy mix, all being driven by the government on a mission mode, and for whatever it's worth, targets being achieved on that particular part of the energy mix. So what's missing in the hydrocarbon business? A few years back, we kind of started with this talk about, if I remember correctly, was it 1,000 tons of coal production by 2020? And now I don't see that talked about very much. I recognize that coal is a dirty black fuel, but there are targets, and then there are targets, and we meet some of them.
So as far as oil and gas is concerned, your success or failure parameter is true only as of yesterday. And when I say so, I say for the reason that look at the world-class oil provinces still being discovered in areas which were not considered actually, to have lot of oil and gas. And I was recently in Guyana. The kind of endowment they have got is huge. Suriname is most probably going to be the next. And what Government of India has done, it has actually released a lot of area which was so far prohibited for exploration for the same purpose. And I'm pretty sure that this time we are likely to be luckier. We have done well. I think in terms of Bombay High, we have had one of the world-class discoveries. We kept on adding scales to that, but probably those additions were just about enough to arrest the decline or moderate the decline. In fact, we achieved that peak and never went beyond that. So I don't think it is that much to do with, frankly speaking, the government policy. Government did everything, and I think credit to the key players who really did their best, because at the end of the day it's a function of the geological area also. But I am pretty sure with the latest policies, the kind of area which will be put on exploration is going to be huge, and I'm sure that the India will have some very good discoveries this time around. So government has done fairly well, but at the same time, I think we have to start thinking in terms of two key points in time. One is 2050, by when the world wants to transition, and 2070. A world is going to transition fully. It will have, if it really happens, which is, I'm pretty optimistic it will happen, for the reason that the initial signs of success of that transition story one can read. In India, you have seen that results have been dramatic. The cost difference between the green or low carbon options versus the fossil fuel options has come down. In fact, actually fossil fuels themselves can transform as a business in a manner that the carbon emissions can be reduced considerably. So when I talked of gas-based ecosystem, probably that will immediately reduce the emissions by around 50% or so, and help build scale in certain areas. So while end state may not come exactly the way we envision, everything is not going to be 100% green in 2050 also, but the technologies added with something like CCUS, they will enable an era where the energy will be delivered in a cleaner fashion, and gas is likely to be a critical element to that. So for India, probably longer, because we would require that for a longer period, and we have got that luxury of 20 years in post the rest of the world has transitioned.
And deservedly so. Deepak, I was actually just going to come to you. Please feel free to make the comments that you would want to, but also a request, if you can put on your analyst hat for a few minutes and talk about what this 2030 and 2070 targets mean for India. Or let me kind of change the dates a bit. 2047, energy independence; 2070, net zero. We are at a certain per capita energy consumption right now. We are at a certain per capita oil consumption right now. You saw the chart that Michael had put up in the morning. It kind of clearly showed that no country, no economy in the world grows, no population in the world, no civilization in the world becomes more prosperous without consuming more energy. But how far can we go? How far should we go? And how far will we go?
Sure. So I'll take the liberty to answer one of your first questions, which Subhashi very positively answered from the exploration and discoveries perspective. But that sharpshooting your question on gas targets of 15%, to put it straight, Kaushik, I don't think it's in the hands of the government. If you sell gas to homes and to CNG vehicles, we are not going to meet 15%. And any amount of statistics and calculations and analysis you do, it will never be proven that by promoting CGD companies to sell PNG and CNG, we will reach 15%. It has to be industrial and commercial, and which is where the government can do very little. At the best it can do is to promote CGD companies to put more investment into the downstream gas consumption, and not so, from a technology perspective, not so innovative, but innovative business models to go into industry and commercial for utilization of gas. That's the only way the Japanese, the Chinese, the US market have grown. It's known to us. But that's a code which is not getting cracked for the last 15 years. So how much ever you may chase 15%, if industry and commercial does not happen, that target will never be met. So that's the miss, and I can tell you by analysis it will get proven, be it from pricing context or expansion. Coming to your question about 2047, 2070, etc., etc. Look, I'm making a very provocative sentence. These goals will move, either move up or move down. Also, the solutions to these goals will evolve every year very differently. From the energy transition context also, Mr. Subhash Kumar may have analyzed that what was being thought of in 2022 and what is being thought of in 2025 is slightly different. It will evolve. Technologies will come in, information technologies, communication technology will change it. But more importantly, the markets are going to change all of this. Imagine an industrial zone which does not exist in India so much informally in Dahej, Ankleshwar, Bharuch, you could see in Surat. But there aren't industrial zones, if I may say, massive industrial zones where everything is gasified. You change completely different methodology of gas consumption or energy servicing as compared to others. Also, why I am saying that these goals will change and we will also thank ourselves for not having met them, there is a live example I'll give you. I'm not so much in the electricity sector, some of the experts in the audience would probably say, but I've heard this sentence. Some of those electricity transmission people who have spent 35 years in Indian infrastructure development, transmission and distribution, say that we did not go for mega transmission towers and mega cables. Today, in the energy transition mode, when the feeds are coming in from disaggregated sources of power and more importantly, more reactive power, we are thanking ourselves that we did not create that kind of infrastructure. Look at this, and this is just 10 years back old debate. So probably what misses we do, we may not miss so much in future. There are newer ways of doing things which will come up. But I thought we should continuously focus on to what's the end objective, and we'll be at it. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, that's a very useful perspective. We are coming to the end of our session, and what I'll then do is, just taking that cue from Deepak, ask every panelist to take about 30 seconds and talk about one opportunity and one miss that we've had in this sector in the past 30 years and going forward in the next 30 years. Mithil Sabha, if we can start with you. One miss and one achievement or one target that we should have.
See, as far as safety is concerned, I think industry has moved a lot. So that's a very positive thing. What I have seen safety when I joined way back in 1987 in ONGC, and what I see today from the eyes of ED, OISD in all the public and private sector. So we have moved a lot of space. Still, there is a scope for further improvement.
That's a bit of a difficult one for me, Kaushik, because I'm quite new to the Indian context. So I might dodge your question. I might spin it a little bit differently.
By all means.
Yeah, what I will say, I'm not going to talk about hits or misses, but I do think there's tremendous potential here. I mean, that's why I'm here. That's why I came to India for this phase in my own professional career. And I'm tremendously excited about just the dynamic environment and the opportunities that we have here. And so I touched on some of those earlier, and especially on the new business ventures, underground coal gasification, hydrogen, helium. I think we'll see a lot more traction and acceleration of those moving forward in the coming years. So it's a very exciting place to be.
Welcome to India.
So if I were put it this way, that we set up ONGC Videsh within 9 years of setting up ONGC. It was a foresight, and each time we became comfortable with domestic production, we forgot the significance of overseas expansion. We missed big time on creating a multinational. In actually certain years, I am told the real records don't exist. But ONGC Videsh profits were higher than ONGC in 70s until 79 when our fields were nationalized in Iran. So that's a huge, huge miss. We would have one of the large organizations. In terms of opportunity, we have woken up as a nation. We are confident, and we have that realization that we have capacity to make it happen. But still, I would emphasize that having the right condition to be successful versus making it to the, the post requires an effort. One cannot be satisfied only with announcements and programs. Those have to be implemented and followed up. That is seriously required. It should not look like a function के खाना पीना हुआ और सब निकल गए प्लेटें फिर बाद में कोई साफ नहीं कर रहा है. So one has to see through. We have to see through 2050. We have to see through, ensure that we make it by 2050 rather than 2070.
Thanks, Deepak. You can see the time bomb going off.
The major miss, in my view, is building policies, infrastructure, regulations, incentivization, investments for energy efficiency. This is something for us to catch up with China, the example that Mr. Subhash Kumar gave, and probably even US, China, Japan, etc. It will take us at least 5 to 10 years to reverse that trend. In your language, energy elasticity to GDP, for it to shrink and come down. It has done a good job until now, but it's nothing to be satisfied about. So we have missed a big time on looking at energy efficiency of the economy as a target, and probably we are paying a price for that now. From the opportunity perspective for exploration production, since the demand has been projected in our speeches, where is the possibility of democratization of the individual value chains in exploration production, and can we cut that so-called long NELP or OALP contracts, 35 years, 40 years envisaging into one contract for companies who are not big? It's just not possible for them. We still have an opportunity to try and see if data collection to oil production and retiring the field, can it be still broken down in contracts? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. Apologies to everyone. We went a couple of minutes over, but this was a really, really interesting discussion. I learned a lot, and I'm hoping that you enjoyed the conversation as well.